be seated. And I invite any children who are here to come and join me. Come have a seat. Give them a moment here. It looks like they're coming. You want to sit here with us? Aw. So I thought I would just spend a couple minutes this morning talking about next week. You guys know what next week is? Holy Week. Holy Week. We're close. You had the first syllable. So, Holy Week, which is the week that we spend really getting ready for Easter, thinking about Jesus' last days on earth and his death. Because without his death, there can't be a resurrection, right? So, all of that is important. And I thought it might be, what I might do is talk with you guys a little bit about the things that are going to be different next week. Because we come for a lot of these special services, and it's not like just every Sunday. Like next Sunday, it's Palm Sunday, the day we celebrate Jesus coming into Jerusalem. And it's the one Sunday of the year where we don't start the service in here, in the church. We'll meet outside at the parking lot instead. And we'll say some prayers, and then we'll pick up palms, and we'll get to carry the palms in procession into the church, and we can wave our palms around, and we can be just like the crowds who welcomed Jesus into Jerusalem. And then on Thursday night, Maundy Thursday, we celebrate the Last Supper. Now, we do part of the Last Supper every time we're here together, right? When we take bread and wine and do with it as Jesus told us to do. But on Maundy Thursday, we do another thing that comes from the Last Supper. We wash each other's feet. We actually will have chairs out here, and somebody will wash the feet of everybody here. We get a chance to wash each other's feet, and that's because Jesus told us that if we really want to be his body, we have to serve each other. And so we'll wash each other's feet just the way Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. And then, at the end of the service, we'll strip the altar. We'll take the candles and the cloths and even the cross and take them all out of the church so that the church will be completely bare for Good Friday. I remember a service once with a little bitty guy, probably about your age, during the stripping of the altar, started shouting out, "Hey, what are they doing? They're taking everything away. I don't like it." And he was the person who got it the most that night. Because as we go into Good Friday, we're not supposed to like it. But we come here on Good Friday to remember that Jesus died for you and for you and for you and for me and for everybody here. And that because of that, resurrection is possible. Then I'll bet you guys are all going to be here on Easter morning, right? Come and hunt for the eggs and come to the services and all of that. But some of us will gather here late on Saturday night before Easter, and we'll gather outside and we'll bless a fire. It'll be the first light of Easter, and we'll use that to light all the candles with so that we can celebrate Jesus being the light that comes into the darkness. Holy Week is a cool week. It's one of my favorite times of the year. And even if you don't think you understand everything, pay attention. Because I think that you guys, like that little guy that I can remember from all those years ago, probably have something to teach me and the other grown-ups here about what we're doing when we're together next week, too. Okay? Out of the depths have I called to you, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears consider well the voice of my supplication. Usually when we come together on Sunday mornings, we like to focus on happy thoughts. How much God loves us. How we can love one another. How we can make a difference. But not everything in life is happy. One of the sad realities of human existence is that no matter how much we love or are loved, no matter how much we do the right thing, some of us will suffer. And sometimes there will be nothing that any of us can do to stop that suffering. Right now in our own congregation, there are people for whom the words of the psalm we have prayed together this morning express exactly their own spiritual state. Look around you. Who is absent today? Who might be suffering quietly? Might it even be you? Sometimes our suffering is the result of poor choices on our own part, decisions we make that come back to bite us. Sometimes our suffering is caused by others and has nothing at all to do with our own choices. And sometimes our suffering can't be blamed on anyone. But the pain and the despair it causes are just as real. Whether we deserve our sufferings or not, whether we know why we are suffering or not, we cannot suffer silently forever. We must learn to be bold. We must, like the psalmist, cry out. Our despair must have a voice. In the late 19th century, the poet, playwright, and novelist Oscar Wilde found himself imprisoned in Reading Jail in England. His crime was that he was a homosexual. He hadn't harmed anyone. He had only been someone that society found different and distasteful. And different and distasteful meant wrong in that society. And as we all know, even from our own society, wrong must be punished. Wilde spent 2 years in prison at hard labor. While he was there, he wrote a powerful essay entitled De Profundis. De Profundis is Latin for out of the depths, the first words of that psalm we prayed together today. If you look in the prayer book, you'll note that those opening Latin words appear at the beginning of the psalm like a title. Wilde begins this essay named for our psalm by speaking for those who suffer in the prison. Here is some of what he has to say. Suffering is one very long moment. We cannot divide it by seasons. We can only record its moods and chronicle their return. With us, time itself does not progress. It revolves. It seems to circle round one center of pain. For us, there is only one season, the season of sorrow. The very sun and moon seem taken from us. Outside, the day may be blue and gold, but the light that creeps down through the thickly muffled glass of the small iron-barred window beneath which one sits is gray. It is always twilight in one's cell, as it is always twilight in one's heart. The cry of lament, the voice of sorrow and suffering can be overwhelming. We hear the complaint, we see the suffering, and feeling powerless, we too can be sucked into the place of despair. But lament does not need to lead us to despair. Sometimes we must travel into the dark places, into the very depths themselves, before we can find the humility to turn to God with our lamentations. And that's the sticking point. While we may not be able to escape pain and sorrows, we can choose how we experience them. There's a Buddhist teaching that says that suffering is a negative choice we make when undergoing pain. But while we must undergo the pain, we can choose not to suffer. Or to put it another way, we can choose not to allow the pain and sorrow to have the last word, the final, ultimate power over us. I suspect that many of you who have experienced great loss or pain in your own lives and have persevered through it might understand what I'm saying here. A little while on from the lament we heard in his essay, Oscar Wilde says, "Where there is sorrow, there is holy ground." He says this because in his time in prison, in his pain and sorrow, he learned the truth of the teaching I have just shared with you. He was brought low, and in that forced humility, he found a measure of true humility and the paradoxical freedom that it gives. He was able to accept the pains and the sorrows, and by accepting them, to stop them from having absolute power over himself. He conquered despair and was able to find hope for a future beyond the painful cycle of the present moment. As Christians, our hope is found not in empty promises of some heavenly future. Our hope is found in the honesty of accepting pain and sorrow. Our hope is here, in a cross, and in a God who took on our humanity and answered pain and sorrow by sharing in it, experiencing it at its absolute worst. That is our hope. That no matter how bad it gets, no matter how great the pain, how overwhelming the sorrow, how deep the mightiest depth, Jesus has been there, faced it, accepted it, ultimately overcome it. We do not experience pain and sorrow alone. We may have to go through it, but we endure it accompanied by one who loves us enough to go through it with us. Oscar Wilde, for those of you who know of him, was not a man of religion. He gave faith only, in his own words, to what one can touch and look at. And yet even he, this adamant agnostic, found a saving power in the cross of Jesus. Here's what he has to say. There is still something to me almost incredible in the idea of a young Galilean peasant imagining that he could bear on his own shoulders the burden of the entire world. All that had already been done and suffered, and all that was yet to be done and suffered. The sufferings of those whose names are legion and whose dwelling is among the tombs, oppressed nationalities, factory children, thieves, people in prison, outcasts, those who are dumb under oppression and whose silence is heard only of God. And not merely imagining this, but actually achieving it, so that at the present moment, all who come in contact with his personality, even though they may neither bow to his altar nor kneel before his priest, in some way find that the ugliness of their sin is taken away and the beauty of their sorrow revealed to them. You see, even to this man who admitted that he had no faith, there was hope in the cross of Christ. Wilde, in his own peculiar way, came to know the truth that we proclaim. In the cross of Christ, suffering has been overcome. Whatever pain and sorrow we have brought onto ourselves, it has already been overcome. Whatever pain and sorrow others may visit on us through no deserving of our own, it has already been overcome. Whatever pain and sorrow that might come into our lives for no discernible reason at all, it has already been overcome. The cross of Christ delivers us from despair. Through the cross, Christ has conquered and redeemed all suffering, once and for all. Now, there is an unfortunate trend in Christian history where some use this truth of Christ's redemption of suffering in a perverse way. Some say that because suffering is redeemed, we are under no obligation to try and help those who are in pain and sorrow. And I beg of you, please see this for the perverse lie that it is. We are indeed obligated to do all that we can to free those who are persecuted, to heal those who are sick, to comfort those who are sorrowing, to stand with those who are alone. That is the work that Jesus began here on earth. That is the work he gave us to do. We are not to rest while any of God's children are kept from the fullness of life here and now. And if we can't overcome their pain and sorrow, then we are to be crucified to it with Christ. We are to join our voices to theirs and cry out in lamentation for deliverance. We are to be the physical presence of the victory of Christ's cross to those in the depths, because just like Oscar Wilde, they might only believe in what they can touch and see. Why doesn't God just take away our pain and sorrow? I don't know the answer to that one. Maybe God gave up that power when he gave us the freedom to choose. Maybe God knows that until all of us learn the truth about the deliverance from suffering given us in the cross, that we would just keep trying to create suffering, even if it was taken away from us time and again. Only God really knows the answer. I don't know why there is pain and sorrow, and I stopped trying to figure it out a long time ago. But I do know that we can choose to live into the power of the cross. We can choose not to suffer. We can choose to refuse pain and sorrow the final word. We can choose to embrace the hope found in a God who loves us so much that he will undergo any pain and sorrow with us. And when we make that choice, we will find the holiness that can be learned in the land of sorrow. And we will discover anew the power of the cross for this broken world in which we live. And we will find the strength to wait for the Lord. For with him, there truly is plenteous redemption.